Trump was right. A new court filing by Special Counsel John Durham reveals that lawyers for the Clinton campaign paid a technology company to, quote, infiltrate servers belonging to Trump Tower and later the White House in order to establish a narrative linking Donald Trump to Russia. The filing all but confirms that associates of the Clinton campaign spied on Trump before and even after the presidential campaign. We'll take a look at the latest bombshell from the Durham probe in tonight's Hold the Line. Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. Russia collusion was a lie from the start. We've established that. We know there was no collusion between Trump and Russia. This was all based on Hillary campaign opposition research, laundered through the intelligence community, and in coordination with the Democrat-aligned legacy media, all the journos out there, trying to convince people that somehow Donald Trump worked with the Kremlin, with Vladimir Putin, to steal the election. And it never even really was clear on how exactly that was supposed to have happened. Some Facebook ad buys, hacking of emails, releasing email. It was always just smoke and mirrors. But what was real was the actual collusion, or really a better word for it would be conspiracy, of the Hillary campaign, members of the intelligence and national security apparatus, the deep state, and as we now know, also the journos who were working hand in glove with them. Fortunately, there is the Durham probe. See, we're not going to let this go, folks. I know this was a few years back, and there's a lot going on in the world. We'll talk about some of that today as well. But this matters. There has to be accountability for spying on a presidential campaign and then on a president by the opposition party, or else what kind of a country, what kind of a government do we really have? Now, this is from the Durham filing itself. This is from Special Counsel Durham's filing right now. Beginning in approximately July 2016, Tech Executive One had worked with the defendant, former Clinton campaign lawyer Michael Sussman, a U.S. investigative firm retained by law firm One, on behalf of the Clinton campaign, numerous cyber researchers and employees at multiple internet companies. All right, Tech Executive One tasked these researchers to mine internet data to establish an inference and narrative tying then candidate Trump to Russia. In doing so, Tech Executive One indicated that he was seeking to please certain VIPs, referring to individuals at law firm One and the Clinton campaign. All right, now, this shows you, starts to pull together. Now, there's a lot of moving pieces here, so I understand that we're getting down into the details. But this is starting to show you how this all came together, the Russia collusion delusion that was foisted on the American people for years. But they were fabricating a narrative, you see. They paid people in the tech world to come up with Trump-Russia ties. And then the press and the deep state were all acting like, oh my gosh, look at all these Trump-Russia ties. The whole thing was a fraud. Back to this filing. The government's evidence at trial will establish that among the internet data Tech Executive One and his associates exploited was domain name system internet traffic pertaining to a particular healthcare provider, Trump Tower, Donald Trump Central Park West apartment building, and the executive office of the President of the United States. Hold on. Think about this. The government's evidence at trial will establish that the tech data that we're talking about here included Trump Tower, Trump's private home, and the executive office of the President of the United States. They're trying to pull this data and then also try to fabricate a narrative of collusion with Russia. What the heck is going on? Note, Fusion GPS then shopped the information that it obtained from all this to the media. All right, watch this. December 2021 from The Nation. Along with others, Fusion GPS founders Glenn Simpson and Peter Fritsch simultaneously funneled information about suspected collusion to journalists, the FBI, and lawmakers, and then told reporters that government officials were investigating the issue. The result was a feedback loop that convinced journalists who already abhorred Trump for good reasons to believe they were on the right track. Interesting. So they essentially planted the seeds of Russia collusion, fabricated it, right? Just came up with it. Oh, look, there's some Russia connection on some servers somewhere. And then they pointed the FBI toward it and they said, wow, we've heard about look at that. There's some Russia connectivity with Trump It's crazy, folks. Look at what they did. Reuters, the New York Times, and ABC turned down this story, but Slate agreed to run it. Slate headline, October 2016, was a Trump server communicating with Russia. This spring, a group of computer scientists set out to determine whether hackers were interfering with the Trump campaign. They found something that they weren't expecting. So you're seeing this actually happened. This whole creation of the Russia narrative, going back to 2016, the beginning of 2016, the Trump campaign, you had people paid by the Clinton campaign to create this Russia noise. And then once they had created some Russia noise, other people said, oh, look, there's Russia noise. Let's get the FBI involved. The whole thing was a fraud. And the Clinton campaign, after paying people to create the noise about Russia, the Clinton campaign seized on it. Here you go. Clinton tweet from October 31st, 2016. Computer scientists have apparently uncovered a covert server linking the Trump organization to a Russian-backed bank, and attaches a statement from Jake Sullivan on the new report. So they were actually trying to make this case. I know we're going deep into the rabbit hole here, folks, but you see how they built this thing top to bottom. The whole thing was a fraud. The Democrats didn't get confused. They created the fraud and then pretended like it was real. Jake Sullivan in that statement, by the way, this secret hotline may be the key to unlocking the mystery of Trump's ties to Russia. It certainly seems the Trump organization had something to hide, given that it apparently took steps to conceal the link when it was discovered by journalists. Wow, right? You see it all lining up here. They pay people to find Russia connections. They get the FBI to start looking at Russia connections. And then the Clinton campaign says, well, we're hearing rumors of Russia connections with Trump. Working for Fusion GPS, by the way, ex-British spy Christopher Steele also used the information to try and get the FBI to open up an investigation into the Trump campaign. This is from the 2019 report by Inspector General Michael Horowitz on FISA abuse, by the way. Christopher Steele met on October 11th at the State Department with Deputy Assistant Secretary Kathleen Kavalik, who was a deputy to then Assistant Secretary Victoria Nuland. Steele addressed a wide array of topics during the meeting, including the role of Alfa Bank, one of Russia's largest privately owned banks, as a conduit for secret communications between Manafort and the Kremlin. You should know that the FBI investigated and concluded in 2017, after Trump was president. There are no links between Trump and Alfa Bank. So we are just getting more information here that proves beyond really any reasonable doubt. The Clinton campaign created this whole thing. Russia collusion was the biggest dirty trick, Oppo research fabrication in modern political history. And most of the Democrats involved, including Hillary, got away with it. Trump responded to this, by the way. The latest pleading from Special Counsel John Durham proves indisputable evidence that my campaign and my presidency were spied on by operatives paid by the Hillary Clinton campaign in an effort to develop a completely fabricated connection to Russia. This is a scandal far greater in scope and magnitude than Watergate, and those who were involved in it and knew about it should be subject to criminal prosecution. Absolutely. All right, coming up, we'll have the latest revelations from the Durham report with a deep dive into why this matters and where it's all going. A lot of companies promise your privacy is guaranteed, but we know that's not the truth. That's why you need a new privacy and cybersecurity tool called Secure. It's spelled S-E-K-U-R. Secure uses proprietary encryption and is offering secure instant messaging and email. Look, privacy is a big issue now, and if you don't have Secure, you don't know who's going through all your stuff. Secure is your solution to stop the constant theft of your digital identity. Costs only $5 for the messenger, only $10 for the messenger and email combination package. Go to secure.com and take back your privacy today. That's SEKUR.com and use promo code BUCK for 25% off. We'll be right back with more. Hold the line. President Donald Trump has once again been vindicated by a jaw-dropping federal filing from Special Counsel John Durham, who has been investigating allegations of the Russia collusion delusion during the 2016 presidential election. If Durham's long-awaited filing is proven to be true, then Trump has been right the whole time, of course, despite attempts from the media to discredit those claims. Scandal could be compared to Watergate. In fact, really much bigger than Watergate, and yet the media has spent almost no time on these revelations at all. They have no interest in talking about them. So we have to wonder for a moment here, what the heck is going on? Well, folks, this goes to the very center of the apparatus and the power that it wields. Because, as you know, the primary means by which they tried to take down Donald Trump as president was this Russia collusion lie. It wasn't on some policy issue. It wasn't on all the other things they usually make a lot of noise about. It was he was a Russian stooge. And they seem to really believe this. They seem to think that somehow this would catch on with the American people. Trump knew that this was crap. Trump knew that this was all lie. In fact, here's a flashback to October of 2020. But just look at the way that serious journo Leslie Stahl responds to his comment about being spied on. Watch.
So
the biggest scandal was when they spied on my campaign. They spied on my campaign.
There's no real evidence of that.
Of course there is.
No.
It's all over the place. Leslie,
Sir,
they spied on my campaign and they got caught.
Can I say something? You know, this is 60 Minutes, and we can't put on things we can't verify.
You won't put it on because it's bad for Biden.
We can't put on things we can't verify.
Leslie, they spied on my campaign.
Well, we can't verify
It's been totally
that.
verified.
No.
It's been, just go down and get the papers. They spied on my campaign, they got caught.
No.
And then they went much further than that, and they got caught.
Yes, they spied on his campaign, and they got caught. That is all true. When you're using FISA, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, procedures to go after somebody tied to Trump in his campaign, so that then you can also look at their communications and do hops and skips and find other people to look at, that is spying. And they lied. In fact, now we know because of the Durham probe, they actually lied about some of the people who were about some of the people involved, the extent of what information they could even bring to bear. Carter Page, most notably, they were framing people so that they could get FISA on them, making stuff up. And there's people who have gone to prison or are facing prison at least for some of that malfeasance. At least that's what you see from the Durham probe right now, according to the most recent revelations, the reporting coming out here from Ratcliffe, who was the director of national intelligence at the time. But just understand how central this was to their anti-Trump efforts. And this comes at a time when we have to keep in mind, we may be seeing Trump run for president again in the future. So this is not an over and done with issue. They're going to be yelling about January 6th, and they're going to be making all kinds of complaints about an insurrection and all this other stuff. What about the soft coup attempt from inside the deep state to get rid of Donald Trump based on the lie of Russia collusion? Remember this one? This is Hillary Clinton back in 2016. It's time for Trump to answer serious questions about his ties to Russia. Okay, what ties to Russia? Donald Trump has a secret server. Yes. It was set up to communicate privately with Putin's Alpha Bank. Yeah, you know, when a reporter asked about it, they shut it down. When 1 week later they created a new server with a different name for the same purpose. Lies. She was lying, folks. Lying about all of this to try to defeat her primary the political opponent that she had, who then, of course, kicked her butt in the election, thank heavens. But think about what that did for 4 years of the Trump presidency, while they had that completely absurd special counsel, the Mueller probe looking into imaginary Russia collusion. And then they just used that as a process crimes finding expedition so that they could try to get people jammed up who didn't actually do anything wrong, didn't do anything illegal. It's outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. But here we are, looking at this now and understanding how they got away with it. Unless the Durham probe comes along and follows through on the promise here of getting real answers, real results, and real prosecutions. Doing a slap on the wrist for a lawyer here or there who fabricated evidence or lied under oath, sure, fine. But we need some of the people who were involved at the very top, like, for example, the person you're seeing on your screen, to answer for whether there was any criminal behavior, criminal conspiracy. Going to the FBI with false information to start a massive nationwide investigation of your political opponent is illegal. It's conspiracy. You're not allowed to lie to the FBI. But the FBI was lying too. You see, that's the problem. They were in on it in so many ways. And so where does all of this go? Don't let this story just dissipate entirely in your minds. Don't think that this is over. It's not. We don't have all the answers. We need to get all the answers. And that only happens if we keep the pressure on and keep our eyes open. Durham is not done. There is an expectation of more indictments coming, and we will continue to watch for that going forward. This guy is a serious, no-nonsense dude. Everyone thinks so who knows him from the legal world. It's not over yet. There won't be total justice, but there could be some measure of justice. Someone might get locked up. All right, celebrity hypocrites go maskless and rapper Eminem takes a knee. It was all part of last night's Super Bowl festivities. Coming up, we'll talk to the founder of the Douglas Society, the First TV's Rob Smith, about the big game. Stay right there. You can't make it up, folks. A host of Hollywood celebs have been slammed as hypocrites for refusing to don the mask at the Super Bowl in defiance of the actual local mandate, which says you got to mask up at that Super Bowl. Much like LA's Mayor Eric Garcetti, they all must have been holding their breath for the whole game. Very impressive. Joining me now is the founder and president of the Douglas Society and our contributor here at the First TV, Rob Smith. Mr. Smith, good to see you, sir.
Good to see you, Buck.
Now, I just want everyone to be very clear on this one because we did the homework and we got the receipts. Los Angeles Public Health, from their official Twitter, headed to the big game. Masks will be required at the stadium. Fans will also need to show vaccination proof or a negative COVID-19 test prior to entry. Rob, I saw a lot of people who are fancy celebrities who, let's all be honest, are also big Democrats, because I recognize some of those faces from their, not Mark Wahlberg necessarily, but a lot of the other ones. What's going on here, Rob?
Well, what's going on here is that these Hollywood celebrities are as sick of these stupid mask mandates as everybody else. And in Hollywood celebrities' defense, and I don't say that very often, most of the people in the stands and in the stadium were not wearing masks either. Here's the thing. Everybody is just so completely over all of this. Nobody can be bothered anymore. That is from Charlize Theron to, whoever's down there in the stands that bought a ticket as well. Just nobody cares anymore. And so instead of hating on these Hollywood celebrities, which is admittedly fun to do, and I would be hating on them more if they were still engaged in the same mass theater that they were, say, in the past 8 to 12 months, right? You got Charlize Theron was on Twitter, I would say, 10, 12 months ago with, wear your damn mask and all this other stuff. Haven't seen this stuff from her in a couple months. Haven't seen this stuff from a lot of these celebrities in a couple of months. The people that are running the LA County, health Twitter, they just have to play these games. But look, these celebrities aren't, you are not, I am not, nobody in the stands are. COVID is over for all intents and purposes, if you ask me. And this celebrity behavior is just reflective of all that.
Ted Cruz tweeted out, as the Hollywood liberals and politicians at the Super Bowl showed us yesterday, American elites are done with mask mandates. It's well past time the left gets rid of its mask mandates on kids in schools too. I mean, this is remarkable, Rob. You have all these adults who, and you rightly point out, by the way, I'm not saying, where are their masks? Because I want them to wear masks. I'm just saying, we all understand this is bullcrap now, right? Like, we all see that this whole, wear your mask when you do this, but not when you do that, but here, but not there. It's arbitrary garbage. But they're making kids still mask up in Los Angeles, in New York City, in DC, even beyond the mandate expiring for everybody else for masks in March. Kids are still going to have to mask up. Why the child abuse?
Well, an important point is that in all of these schools, but these are public schools, not private schools. Remember, it was only the public schools that shut down and went to remote learning. It is only the public schools that had these ridiculous mask mandates. The children of the elites and private schools never shut down, right? Private schools never had these kinds of mandates. And the reason why these mask mandates and all of this stuff is still going on with the schools is because one of the biggest donors to the Democrat Party is, of course, these teachers unions. These teachers unions have everything under control. And so this is going to continue until there can become some sort of deal between these Democrat Party officials and the teachers unions, because they really are still pushing this. I think that what's going on in the school system is the kind of the last domino to fall. Like you said, DC has just they're ending their mask mandates, they're ending their vax mandates. I think that New York is probably not too far behind. The vast majority of the American public has just moved on from this. And I think the reason why these public school systems, again, you have to realize that it is the public school systems and not the private schools of the elite children, because those were never closed down. They never went to remote learning, and they never had these mask mandates. And why we're seeing this mask theater in these public schools is all about the teachers union. They have obviously not gotten what they wanted in terms of this sort of Faustian deal with the devil that they have made with these Democrat politicians. And we will not see this stuff end until these teachers unions get whatever it is that they're looking for.
Just want to ask you, since we're talking about the Super Bowl mask situation, Eminem kneeled on stage during the Super Bowl 2022 halftime show performance. The NFL has denied a report that the league objected to the Colin Kaepernick-style gesture. I don't. See, my thing is, if it's not during the anthem, like, do it. I mean, I don't understand. This is not. How can you have a Colin Kaepernick? The whole point of the Colin Kaepernick controversy was that people felt it was disrespecting the flag. I mean, I felt that way. So doing it during the halftime show, kneel all you want, right? I don't really get it.
Yeah, and what's missing from the conversation about this, Buck, is there's a lot of people that are kind of like assuming whatever Eminem's intentions were. Has Eminem gone on record and talked about this at all? Has he said that this is supposed to be in any way connected to the Colin Kaepernick thing? Are we entirely sure? And honestly, I'm being completely honest here. Are we entirely sure that Eminem didn't get overcome by the moment and was praying? I mean, there's so little that we know of this. And so there's people on both sides of the aisle sort of projecting whatever our political leanings are to a moment that has not been completely defined by the man himself. So I don't know what it was that he was doing, and I'm not going to assume to know what he was doing until I hear it from the horse's mouth, or the Eminem's mouth, so to speak.
And then just real quick, Rob, the left, are they completely insane? Are some of them totally insane? Here's a CNN article comparing Joe Rogan to the January 6th riot. This was actually published at CNN.com. Rogan's use of the N-word may also be drawing us closer to something else, destroying any plausible shot at building a genuine multiracial democracy. The January 6th insurrection was so dangerous because it violated a political norm. What are we when a white entertainer with a huge public following can use the N-word repeatedly and get a $100 million offer to bring a real conversation on their platform? Jan 6, Joe Rogan, threat to democracy, use of the N-word. What, Rob? What? Just what?
Well, you have to understand, and we've talked about this past, Buck, what this is all about. When you see something coming from a major mainstream media organization like CNN that is basically smearing one of their biggest competitors, you have to understand that's exactly what it is. Joe Rogan, his audience, his platform, his influence is a threat to CNN, whose influence does not extend much beyond your local airport television set, right? So nobody watches this stuff anymore. And so you have to understand that's what that's all about, and you have to put that in context. And again, when it comes from the left, they don't care when people on their side use this word in context. When Joe Rogan used the word, he'll be reading it off of something or talking about a transcript or talking about the word in context as in terms of what somebody else said. Joe Biden did the same thing in DC back when he was a senator. Nobody has any issue with this. So this is a lot of selective outrage, and what this outrage is all about is the fact that Joe Rogan has an enormous platform that dwarfs that of these mainstream media outlets who are trying to destroy him, and they are trying to define him negatively in the eyes of these people leading up to a midterm and again another presidential election, particularly and only because they cannot control what he says.
Here's a CNN article comparing Joe Rogan, again, CNN, to Joe Rogan to the Rwandan genocide. Consider what happened less than 30 years ago in Rwanda when some 800,000 civilians were slaughtered in a 3-month period. What triggered the violence were the messages that came from people in positions of power. Many, like Rogan, had a public megaphone and an audience. Joe Rogan equals Rwanda genocide over at CNN somehow, Rob. Wow.
Look, it's also ridiculous. You can't even take it seriously. And again, CNN is going to be going through some major soul searching over the next couple of years. Zucker's out. Zucker was the one that was he was the one that went so all in on anti-Trump. He was the one that was kind of encouraging this sort of leftist nonsense, not only from their writers that write on that site that nobody goes to, but also their anchors on the shows that nobody watches, right? So they're going to have a real come to Jesus moment in the next 6 months to a year, because people are tuning out of all of this stuff. Of course, you and I and the same people that watch, both of us know that this is completely ridiculous, but they have attracted a crowd to which this is perfectly normal discourse. And that is a very small sort of rapidly shrinking piece of the pie, which is reflected by CNN's terrible ratings and declining web traffic. So this is sort of the last dying grasps of a brand that really has a lot of work to do in order to get back its credibility in the eyes of the public, which I do not believe that it has anymore. You can't even take this stuff seriously.
Rob Smith, always excellent, sir. Good to see you.
Thanks, bud.
According to U.S. officials, Russian forces have moved long-range artillery and rocket launchers into firing positions along the border with Ukraine. Could an attack be imminent? Senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, Bill Roggio, is going to answer that when we come back. Major news breaking over the weekend on the escalating crisis between Russia and Ukraine. President Biden failing to make a breakthrough during his Saturday call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, as the latest U.S. intel says that Russia could invade in a matter of days. Here with reaction, senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, Bill Roggio. Bill, some White House officials have basically admitted that Biden's warning to Putin this weekend did not pan out as planned. Take a look at this statement from the White House on Biden's call with Putin. President Biden was clear that if Russia undertakes a further invasion of Ukraine, the United States, together with our allies and partners, will respond decisively and impose swift and severe costs on Russia. But then the Pentagon came out and characterized the call like this. Watch.
It's certainly not a sign that things are moving in the right direction. It's certainly not a sign that Mr. Putin has any intention to escalate the tensions, and it's certainly not a sign that he's recommitting himself to a diplomatic path forward. So it doesn't give us any cause for optimism.
I mean, is just all the momentum heading toward conflict right now, or is there any real reason for optimism at this stage that can be averted?
Hello, Buck. Yeah, right now things look pretty grim. I don't see any reason to be optimistic. The reality is that Russia and Putin, Vladimir Putin, hold all the cards here. The West is divided. NATO is divided over this. France came out and said they will not commit troops to defend the Ukraine. President Biden said as much several weeks ago, and that statement released by the White House is talking about costs, but the costs are economic and sanctions costs. So, the question is Putin willing to weather those costs to get what he wants in the Ukraine? That's the real question here. That's what we're waiting to find out. Or the other possibility here is the West caves, that it agrees that Ukraine will not be part of NATO and will never allow Ukraine to be part of NATO.
Would that be enough? I mean, Bill, if let's say that we got some consortium together of the diplomats involved here, in the Western diplomats, U.S., Europeans, and we said we guarantee Vladimir Putin in writing, however it is we can make those guarantees as believable as possible or as credible as possible, that we'll never. Would that be enough to avert war at this point? Because what does Putin want here? I mean, everyone's kind of asking that question. Like, what's to be gained? Is it just I don't want Ukraine in NATO, so I'm going to invade this country before it can become a part of NATO, or are there other things?
Yeah, Buck, that is the question, right? Is it enough? I don't think it will be enough. It may be enough to avert a war this week or next week, but in the next several months or within the next year, probably not. Putin ultimately wants the restoration of the Soviet Union. He wants a return of the borders of the Soviet Union, the influence. He does not like the creeping of NATO along its current borders. So he wants Ukraine. He realizes that the Warsaw Pact will not be restored, but he does not want Ukraine, a former Soviet republic, falling back into the sphere of NATO. And he wants to prevent that and regain influence in these former Soviet republics. I think that is very clear. So U.S. guarantees, NATO guarantees that Ukraine won't join NATO is merely a stopgap. He ultimately wants Ukraine back in his sphere of influence, and I believe he wants it politically and militarily in this sphere of influence.
So what does it look like right now if Russia goes in heavy, so to speak? If this happens in the next few days, and you have a Russian blitzkrieg effectively, what kind of a counterpunch can the Ukrainian armed forces provide against this? I mean, what sort of a mismatch are we really looking at here? Is this a fight that would go on for months, weeks, or days?
I think this is a fight that probably would go on for months. The Ukrainians are strong enough to bloody the Russian advance, but not stop it. So they may be able to hurt the Russian force. The reality is what is massed on the Ukrainian frontier is merely a portion of the Russian military. So the Ukrainians can mass a couple of hundred troops, 100,000 troops. The Russians can mass easily over 3 times of that if it was committed to fully taking the Ukraine. So while the initial push may be blunted or bloodied, the Russian follow-up without NATO air support, without NATO ground forces, tanks, the reality is that most of the Ukraine, likely within months, would fall. I mean, you would probably have a collapse of the government and then a pro-Russian government coming in if half the country was taken, and then Putin really would get what he wants.
Do you think that the Russians, though, would be... Are the Russian people going to be willing to... I mean, I know Putin's effectively a dictator, right? But he does need some degree of support from inside his own country and from the apparatus that he presides over. If this turned in... I mean, can you foresee this turning into a bloody counterinsurgency? I mean, people have brought up comparisons to, say, Chechnya, right around, late 90s, early 2000s, which was a much smaller scale situation, and that got pretty bloody and rough for the Russians. Is this looking like it would turn into a long-scale or long-term counterinsurgency? And do the Russians have the stomach for that?
I think what we've learned over the last couple of years, the Russians were very successful in waging a brutal counterinsurgency inside Syria, and also in Chechnya in the 2000s and late 2000 or early 2010s, it suppressed the Chechen, the Caucasus insurgency very brutally. So it has, and it was effective in backing Haftar in Libya as well. So it has experience in this. The Russians are willing to be very brutal. The question is the Russian people going to stand for this? I don't see any opposition to Putin, either politically or domestically. I'm just not seeing it. Perhaps it's there, but the Russians really would have to take a major hit. It would have to lose tens of thousands of troops, and I think in order for that to become a very real problem for Putin.
So let's just put this out there. It sounds like there's a considerable portion of the Russian population at large that would support this, from what we know. We don't know the exact numbers, but there's a sizable portion that would support this, you think, and this is really ultimately about reconstituting a Russian empire, in essence, a Soviet empire under a different name. Are those both true statements for where we are right now?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I'm not certain that the majority of Russians support it, but certainly don't oppose this. It's certainly not providing any significant or even any detectable resistance to this. And that's key. Putin can operate easily in that environment.
What do you think is, at this stage, the final thoughts here about the decision-making process? I mean, the Wall Street Journal, for example, has this piece, The New World Disorder. What Mr. Biden hasn't done is to explain to Americans the new global dangers, what must be done to protect U.S. interests. The problem goes far beyond Ukraine. China wants to capture Taiwan and dominate the Western Pacific. Iran is close to getting a nuclear weapon, and jihadists are far from vanquished. Hypersonic and anti-satellite weapons could take out U.S. defenses around the world in minutes with little or no warning. Look, people, the anxiety is running pretty high right now, but what's your response to that statement? I mean, it doesn't seem like it's beyond the realm of possibility that certainly before Biden's first term is up, we could have a Russian invasion of Ukraine, a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, and Iran getting a nuclear weapon.
I think all of those things are, somewhat likely. All 3 things happening, it's certainly possible, but I think 2 of the 3 things happening is likely at this point, particularly if Russia goes into the Ukraine. NATO does not provide any support for the Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian government collapses. I think the Chinese have to start taking a long, hard look at going into the Ukraine. I think the reality here is that the end of history that we celebrated after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the late 1980s, everyone thought the U.S. would be leading the new world order, but the U.S. has relinquished its role. It began under President Obama, and it's continued to this day. We are seeing the rise of China, the rise of Russian power. Certainly, Russia isn't an equal to the United States, but it's a capable adversary in its sphere. And we've advocated on the Iranian issue as well. U.S. leadership is at a nadir. I don't see how this is restored in the next several years.
Good to see you, Bill. We'll be talking to you.
Thanks, Buck. Always a pleasure.
Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives is asking people to rat on ex-partners for illegal gun activity on Valentine's Day. Not exactly romantic. Talk to you about that and more coming up in Quick Hits. Kids in a Las Vegas elementary classroom cheer and jump for joy after a teacher announces they'll no longer have to wear masks anymore. And you can now add the Canadian flag to the list of flags the far left deems racist. Really? Maple Leaf? It's time for tonight's Quick Hits, but let's get to it. There's some crazy stuff going on right now in Canada. Justin Trudeau is effectively on the brink of declaring a form of martial law in that country to deal with the trucker protests. So looks like they're going to be going full tyrant up north. But there's also been a lot of lies told. Among the lies are that this is a protest that is racist. This is a protest that's about white nationalism. And the left is just making it up as they go along about so much of this. And they're losing their minds. Clearly, I mean, here is an example. Here's a woman who is taking down the Canadian flag and saying it is a sign of domestic terrorism. Watch.
Yeah, please. Why'd you take off my flag off my car?
Because we want you to get the out of our city. You guys are terrorists. You need to get out of our city. That's why.
Okay.
You've turned the Canadian flag into the modern day
You did.
swastika. You guys are literal domestic terrorists in our city. You need to get the out of here.
Okay.
That's why I took your flag off. Please leave our city. Get
Alright.
the out of here. I'd like to give you my email so you can send me that video also.
Sure.
I'll upload it to the internet for you.
Okay, you're very beautiful.
Wow. Throwing your national flag in the snow because it is being flown by somebody you don't like and saying that they symbolize domestic terrorism. I mean, this is pretty crazy, that's for sure. Then there's dating in the era of COVID. Washington Post headline here. He's cute, but is he swab-worthy? How rapid testing became a dating ritual. This is for COVID, friends. Let me say this right now. People that think this way are suffering from an anxiety disorder. There's something wrong with them. They are not mentally healthy. They have a problem. Okay? You don't need to swab somebody to see if you can be around them on a date when you're constantly surrounded by people who may or may not have COVID right now. And by the way, COVID cases have dropped dramatically because the end of the season wasn't our masking, wasn't all these policies they put into place. But this stuff will linger for a while. There are people who truly believe the crazier they are about COVID, the better human beings they are. And that is simply not the case. I'm sorry to have to tell them this. That is simply not true. And then there's this from the ATF. ATFE, actually, because there's explosives in there too. But we usually think of the ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. That's right. As if they weren't regulated enough by the government, the federal agency was created here to make sure that alcohol and tobacco, as well as guns, have people looking out to make sure they don't do anything bad with them. Valentine's Day can still be fun even if you broke up. Do you have information about a former or current partner involved in illegal gun activity? Let us know. We'll make sure it's a Valentine's Day to remember. That's pretty, pretty emotionally bleak, I gotta say. You're gonna be involved with somebody and then you're gonna rat on them to the ATF, even if you broke up. Even if they were a bad guy or gal, I mean, it's going to be a guy that's probably involved in illegal guns, let's be honest. You're going to rat somebody out to the feds? That's on Valentine's Day. It's pretty rough. But, you know, that's the way the federal government's operating these days. This was a good one. This is one, we got to take a moment here. Mask mandates are disappearing in a lot of places in this country right now. In fact, the Washington D.C. Mayor Bowser just announced that in a couple of weeks, the mask mandate will be gone everywhere except schools, hospitals, nursing homes, but schools, once again, they keep holding on to masks in schools where they don't need to have masks at all. This is about control, and this has become an article of religious faith for libs in a lot of cities, a lot of places that are very blue. Here are some kids, just to show you, because one of the big things you've been told, one of the lies that's been out there for a while here is about people who will say that their children don't mind being masked. It's totally fine. They like the mask. Oh, my kid has a Batman mask or a Kamala 2024 mask or whatever. This is how children reacted in Las Vegas on video when they found out in elementary school they didn't have to keep wearing the stupid mask. Watch.
Starting tomorrow, we don't have to wear masks anymore. Is anybody excited?
That's how I will feel, by the way, when Fauci is fired and the history of this pandemic is written in such a way that we see how awful the CDC and the NIH and the rest of the health bureaucrats were, how wrong they were, and when there is a promise from the state, from the federal government, and from anyone who got this so wrong, that they will never do this crazy crap ever again. I will be jumping for joy and screaming when we reach that point, but I'm happy for these kids. Masking is child abuse. It should not be done. People who do it are, no, it's shameful, shameful. We will stay in the fight, though, friends. That's it for tonight's Hold the Line. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly is next. Shields high.